The deafening crack of support beams under pressure was the only warning Zara Finnegan had before the world turned to darkness. One moment, she was examining a promising vein of silver in the dimly lit mine shaft. The next, tons of rock and dirt came crashing down around her, burying her in an earthen tomb that threatened to become her final resting place. Holbrook, Arizona Territory, 1886. It was early May when Zara arrived in Holbrook, a bustling frontier town that had sprung up alongside the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad. At 24, she was determined to make something of herself far from the confines of Philadelphia society. Her father had been a geologist before his death the previous year, and from him, she had inherited not only his tools and journals, but also his passion for the Earth's hidden treasures. "You can't possibly be serious about this, Miss Finnegan," said Mayor Thornton, his bushy eyebrows knitting together as he surveyed the petite woman standing before his desk. "Mining is no occupation for a lady." Zara smoothed her practical brown skirt, her green eyes flashing with determination. "With all due respect, Mr. Mayor, I've studied geology extensively under my father's tutelage. I've already secured the claim rights to the old Morgan property, and I intend to reopen the silver mine there." "That mine's been abandoned for 2 years," the mayor sputtered. "Morgan gave up after nearly going bankrupt. What makes you think you'll fare any better?" Zara produced her father's leather-bound journal from her satchel. "Because my father analyzed samples from that region during his travels west. His notes indicate the Morgan property was abandoned prematurely. The silver's there, sir. It's just not where they were looking," the mayor sighed heavily. "It's your money to lose, Miss Finnegan, but I strongly advise against this venture. At the very least, you'll need experienced hands." "I intend to hire them," Zara replied confidently. "I have sufficient funds to support operations for 6 months." As she left the mayor's office, she felt the stares of townsfolk following her. She was used to it by now. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough, but a woman intent on running a mining operation was practically unheard of. She made her way to the town's only hotel, the Juniper, where she'd taken a modest room. Sitting at her small writing desk, she reviewed her father's notes once more. Tomorrow, she would begin interviewing potential workers. Luke Daniels had seen his share of odd sights during his 8 years roaming the Western Territories. But the notice posted outside the general store in Holbrook was among the strangest. Experienced miners wanted Morgan Silver Mine under new ownership. Inquire at the Juniper Hotel Room 4Z. Finnegan, proprietor Luke, ran a hand over his stubbled jaw. The Morgan mine had been a failed venture, but work was scarce, and he needed something to tide him over until the autumn cattle drives. He'd spent the last 5 years alternating between ranch work and occasional prospecting, having left behind a promising career as an engineer in Boston following a personal tragedy he preferred not to dwell upon. At 32, Luke had the weathered look of a man who lived under the open sky. His tall frame was lean but powerful from years of physical labor, and beneath his wide-brimmed hat, his blue eyes held both intelligence and caution. He wasn't the typical rough-and-tumble cowboy, but he'd adapted to frontier life out of necessity rather than choice. He adjusted his gun belt and headed toward the Juniper. When he knocked on the door of room 4, the last person he expected to see was a young woman with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun. "You must be lost, madam," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm looking for Z. Finnegan." "You've found her," Zara replied, standing her ground in the doorway. "Zara Finnegan, are you here about the mining position, Mr. Daniels, Luke Daniels?" He couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. "You're reopening the Morgan mine, that's correct." "Do you have mining experience, Mr. Daniels?" Luke studied her for a moment. She was dressed practically, not in the fashionable attire of Eastern ladies who occasionally passed through on their way to California. Her determined posture suggested she wasn't some dilettante playing at frontier life. "I've done some prospecting," he acknowledged, "but my experience is more with hydraulic systems and structural engineering. I studied at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology before coming west." Zara's eyebrows rose with interest. An engineer, that could be extremely valuable. The mine will need proper reinforcement and drainage systems. Madam Miss Finnegan, I'm curious about one thing, Luke said. What makes you think there's silver worth digging for in a mine that's already been abandoned? Zara hesitated, then stepped aside. Perhaps you'd better come in, Mr. Daniels. I have some geological surveys I'd like to show you. Inside her room, Zara spread her father's journals and maps across the small table. Luke leaned over them, his engineer's mind immediately engaged by the detailed calculations and cross-sections of the local geology. Your father was William Finnegan, Luke said suddenly, recognizing the notation style. I read his paper on mineral formations in the Appalachian Range during my studies. Zara nodded, a flicker of pride crossing her face. Yes, he passed away last year. These are his notes from when he consulted briefly for the railroad through this region. He identified a potential silver vein running perpendicular to the one Morgan was following. Luke traced the indicated vein with his finger. Morgan was following the conventional wisdom that the vein would run parallel to the ridge, but your father's theory suggests that the richest deposits lie in a cross-cutting vein that was never explored, Zara finished. Exactly. Luke straightened up. It's a sound theory, but implementing it will require significant excavation in a new direction. That means new support structures, ventilation, drainage, all in a mine that's been sitting abandoned for years. That's why I need someone with your expertise, Mr. Daniels, Zara said. I can pay $2 a day plus a 5% share of any profits once the mine is producing. It was a generous offer, especially the profit share, which suggested she truly believed in the venture's potential success. When would you want to start? He asked. I've already hired 3 men with mining experience, Zara replied. We begin preliminary work tomorrow. I plan to spend the first week assessing the condition of the existing tunnels before starting new excavation. Luke considered the offer. The practical side of him recognized it as good pay for skilled work. The engineer in him was intrigued by the challenge, and though he wouldn't admit it, there was something about Zara Finnegan's confidence that made him want to see if her father's theory proved correct. I'll need to see the mine first, he said cautiously. Of course, Zara agreed. Meet us at the livery stable at 7 tomorrow morning. We'll ride out together. The following morning, Luke arrived at the livery to find Zara already there, dressed in sturdy trousers beneath a split riding skirt, practical attire that nonetheless raised eyebrows in conservative Holbrook. She was checking the saddle on a sturdy roan mare while conversing with 3 rough-looking men who Luke assumed were the miners she'd hired. Ah, Mr. Daniels, she called as he approached. Let me introduce you to the rest of our team. This is Mr. Wheaton, Mr. Torres, and Mr. Fleming. The men nodded in greeting. They looked like typical hard rock miners, weathered tough, with the permanent squint of men who spent much of their time in dim light. Fleming, the oldest of the 3, spoke up. Miss Finnegan says you're some kind of engineer, he said, not bothering to hide his skepticism. Ever been in a real mine before or just read about them in books? I've been in enough to know the difference between a proper supporting beam and a prayer, Luke replied evenly. And enough to recognize a potential cave-in before it happens. Fleming grunted, seemingly satisfied with the answer. Wheaton and Torres exchanged glances but said nothing. The ride to the Morgan mine took just under an hour, following a rough trail that wound into the foothills east of Holbrook. The mine entrance was marked by a weathered wooden structure that housed the head frame and winch system for the main shaft. Several smaller buildings, a tool shed, an assay office, and what appeared to be a small bunkhouse stood nearby, all showing signs of neglect. Morgan left in a hurry, Luke observed as they dismounted, but at least he left the infrastructure. The bank seized the equipment when Morgan couldn't pay his debts, Zara explained. I negotiated to purchase everything as part of the claim. Inside the main building, dust covered the winch and ore carts. Luke inspected the mechanism that would lower them into the mine shaft, testing the gears and checking the thick hemp rope for signs of rot or weakness. It'll need oiling, but it seems sound enough, he concluded. The main shaft is about 80 feet deep, according to the survey notes. Fleming had already lit several lanterns, handing them out as the group prepared to descend. "Ladies first?" Wheaton asked with a smirk. Zara took the lantern without hesitation. "I'll go after Mr. Fleming." "Mr. Daniels, would you mind bringing up the rear? I'd appreciate your assessment of the shaft integrity as we descend." The main shaft was a 10-foot square opening reinforced with timber supports at regular intervals. A wooden ladder bolted to one wall provided access. The air grew cooler and damper as they climbed down, their lanterns casting jumping shadows against the rock walls. When they reached the bottom, Luke was pleased to find the main gallery relatively intact. Water had pooled in some areas, but the drainage channels Morgan had cut were still functional. The roof supports showed some signs of stress but no imminent danger. "Better than I expected," Luke said, holding his lantern high to examine the ceiling. Morgan might have failed, but he built properly. For the next several hours, they explored the existing tunnels, with Zara consulting her father's maps and making notations in a small journal she carried. The main excavation extended about 200 yards following a narrow vein of silver that, according to Zara's notes, had played out shortly before Morgan abandoned the operation. "The new vein should intersect about 30 yards in this direction," Zara said, pointing to a solid rock face at the end of a side tunnel. "According to my father's calculations, we should find a much richer deposit if we cut through here." Luke ran his hand over the rock face. "This will be challenging work. The rock is harder here than in the main gallery. But worth the effort if the vein is as rich as my father believed," Zara countered. By late afternoon, they had completed their survey and returned to the surface. Luke had to admit he was impressed by Zara's knowledge and stamina. She had moved through the mine confidently, discussing geological formations with the ease of someone who had indeed studied the subject extensively. "We'll need to shore up some of those supports in the eastern gallery before we begin new excavation," Luke said as they mounted their horses for the return journey. "And the drainage will need improvement if we're going to go deeper." "I trust your judgment on that, Mr. Daniels," Zara replied. "Can you prepare a list of supplies we'll need? I'll arrange for delivery from Prescott if necessary." Over the next 3 weeks, Luke found himself increasingly invested in the Morgan mine project. What had begun as just another job soon became a challenge his engineer's mind couldn't resist. The mine required significant work before they could begin new excavation, and Luke took charge of the structural improvements, while Zara focused on mapping the exact route they would follow to intercept the theoretical silver vein. The other miners, initially skeptical of taking orders from both a woman and a book-learned engineer, gradually came to respect Luke's practical knowledge and Zara's unwavering determination. Fleming, in particular, became a valuable ally, contributing his 30 years of mining experience to complement Luke's technical expertise. "She reminds me of my daughter," Fleming confided to Luke one evening as they rode back to town. "Same fire in her eyes." "My Eliza's a schoolteacher in Denver now. Miss Finnegan certainly knows what she wants," Luke agreed, "and she knows her rocks," Fleming added. "I've met university men who couldn't tell feldspar from fool's gold, but she's got a real eye for it." "I'm starting to think her daddy's theory might hold water after all." By early June, they were ready to begin the new excavation. The existing tunnels had been reinforced, drainage improved, and a more efficient ventilation system installed. Each day they would ride out from Holbrook at dawn, work until late afternoon, then return to town before dusk. Luke found himself increasingly aware of Zara's presence. Despite the practical work clothes and the dust that often covered them all by day's end, there was no denying she was an attractive woman. But more compelling than her appearance was her intelligence and determination. In another life, before Luke had left Boston and his engineering career behind, she was precisely the kind of woman who would have captured his interest. One evening, as they finished securing the tools for the night, Luke found Zara alone in the assay office, examining a rock sample under a magnifying glass. "You should be pleased with today's progress," he said, removing his hat as he entered. We advanced nearly 6 feet. Zara looked up with a smile that transformed her dust-streaked face. At this rate, we should reach the intersection point within 2 weeks. Look at this, Mr. Daniels. She held out the rock sample. See those faint silvery threads? They're getting more pronounced the further we dig. Luke took the sample, their fingers briefly touching in the exchange. He examined the rock, noting the metallic veining Zara had indicated. Promising, he agreed. Though still not the concentration your father predicted. We're not there yet, Zara said confidently, but we're getting closer. There was a moment of silence between them, filled only by the distant sounds of Wheaton and Torres loading supplies onto the wagon outside. May I ask you something, Miss Finnegan? Luke finally said. Of course. What will you do if we find the silver? A mining operation of any significant size would require more men, more equipment. It's not the kind of business typically run by a woman, Zara finished, a hint of challenge in her voice. I'm well aware of the obstacles, Mr. Daniels. But I've already overcome the first and most significant one, getting people to take me seriously enough to start this venture. I didn't mean to imply you couldn't do it, Luke clarified. I'm just curious about your long-term plans. Zara's expression softened. My father believed there was enough silver in that vein to sustain a medium-sized operation for at least 5 years. My plan is to prove the viability of the mine, then use that leverage to secure additional investment. I intend to retain controlling interest, but I'm not opposed to partners who bring capital and expertise. A sound strategy, Luke acknowledged. And what about you, Mr. Daniels? Zara asked. A man with your education could have a prosperous career in any eastern city. What brought you to places like Holbrook? Luke's expression closed slightly. A change of scenery, he said, the brevity of his answer making it clear he didn't wish to elaborate. Zara seemed about to press further, but was interrupted by Fleming calling from outside that they were ready to depart. As June turned to July, the Arizona summer brought scorching heat that made their work increasingly challenging. Despite starting earlier each day to avoid the worst of the afternoon sun, the temperature inside the mine remained uncomfortably warm, and the physical labor of excavation became more taxing. Yet they continued to make steady progress, and the silver content in their samples gradually increased, just as Zara's father had predicted. Luke found himself sharing Zara's excitement with each new advancement, his initial skepticism replaced by growing optimism. Their working relationship had evolved into something approaching friendship. Luke had begun addressing her as Zara rather than Miss Finnegan when they were alone, and she had dropped the Mr. from his name. They often stayed later than the others, discussing the next day's plans or analyzing samples in the assay office. One particularly hot afternoon, after the other miners had already started back to town, Luke found Zara in the main gallery, studying the newly exposed rock face with intense concentration. We should head back soon, he said. It'll be dark in a couple of hours. Just a few more minutes, Zara replied, not looking away from the wall. I think, Luke, look at this. He moved closer, holding his lantern up to illuminate the spot she was examining. There, running through the gray rock like a ribbon, was a distinct vein of silver ore thicker and more concentrated than anything they'd seen so far. Your father was right, Luke said, unable to keep the awe from his voice. This is exactly where he predicted it would be. Zara's face glowed with triumph in the lantern light. We found it, Luke, we actually found it. In her excitement, she turned and threw her arms around him. Luke stiffened momentarily in surprise, then found himself returning the embrace. For a brief moment, they stood together in the dim light, the significance of their discovery hanging in the air between them. When they pulled apart, there was a new awareness in Zara's eyes that hadn't been there before. Luke cleared his throat. We should take some samples back for proper assaying, he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. If the concentration is as high throughout the vein as it appears here, we'll be very wealthy partners, Zara finished, her smile returning. Let's collect those samples. They worked side by side, carefully extracting several pieces of the ore-bearing rock. Their hands occasionally brushed in the confined space, each contact sending a current of awareness through Luke that he hadn't felt in years. "I think that's enough for a preliminary assessment," Zara finally said, securing the samples in a canvas bag. "We can send some to the assayer in Prescott tomorrow." As they gathered their tools and prepared to leave, a low rumble vibrated through the tunnel. Luke froze, his miner's instincts immediately alert. "Did you feel that?" he asked quietly. Zara nodded, her expression turning serious. "Could it be blasting from another mine? There are no other active operations within miles," Luke replied, listening intently. When no further vibrations came, he relaxed slightly. "Might have been a minor earth tremor. They happen occasionally in this region. Should we be concerned?" Luke surveyed the tunnel critically. "The supports are holding well. But perhaps we should have Fleming check them thoroughly tomorrow before we continue." They made their way back through the main gallery toward the shaft, both still buoyed by the discovery of the silver vein despite the momentary concern. As they reached the base of the shaft, another tremor shook the mine, this one more pronounced than the first. "That was no minor tremor," Luke said, alarm evident in his voice. "We need to get out, now." They hurried up the ladder, Luke insisting that Zara go first. They were about halfway to the surface when the most violent shock yet rocked the mine. Above them, timber creaked ominously. "Climb faster," Luke urged, looking up to see dust and small rocks already beginning to fall. Zara scrambled upward with renewed urgency. They were just 15 feet from the surface when Luke heard the sickening sound of timber splitting. He looked up to see one of the main support beams near the top of the shaft beginning to give way. "Jump for the surface," he shouted. "Now." Zara lunged upward, grasping the edge of the shaft opening just as the beam collapsed. Luke pushed her from below, helping propel her onto solid ground. He was preparing to follow when the entire shaft seemed to disintegrate around him. The last thing he heard was Zara screaming his name before a cascade of rock and timber sent him tumbling back into darkness. When Luke regained consciousness, he was lying on his back in near total darkness. Pain radiated from his left leg, and the air was thick with dust. He coughed, wincing at the sharp pain in his ribs that the movement triggered. "Zara," he called weakly, then louder, "Zara." There was no response. He fumbled for the matches he kept in his pocket, striking one to survey his surroundings. The flickering light revealed that he had fallen back to the base of the shaft. Above him, the shaft was completely blocked with debris. To his immense relief, he spotted his lantern nearby, miraculously intact. With effort, he lit the lantern and took stock of his situation. His left leg was pinned beneath a timber, but not crushed. His ribs ached, probably bruised rather than broken, and numerous cuts and scrapes covered his arms. But he was alive, and as far as he could tell, not critically injured. Working carefully, Luke managed to shift the timber enough to free his leg. It hurt terribly, but he could move it, suggesting it wasn't broken. He tore a strip from his shirt to bind a bleeding gash on his thigh, then attempted to stand, using the wall for support. His first concern was Zara. Had she made it completely clear of the shaft before it collapsed? He desperately hoped so, but he had no way to know for certain. His second concern was how to get out. The main shaft was completely blocked, but there might be another way. Luke remembered that mining operations often included emergency escape routes. During their initial survey, they had mapped a narrow ventilation shaft that connected to the surface about 50 yards from the main entrance. It wasn't designed for human passage, but it might be his only option. Limping heavily, lantern in hand, Luke made his way through the main gallery toward where he remembered the ventilation shaft to be. The mine seemed structurally intact below the collapsed main shaft, which gave him hope that the ventilation shaft might also have survived. Meanwhile, on the surface, Zara was frantic. She had managed to scramble clear of the shaft just as it collapsed, but Luke had not been so fortunate. In the immediate aftermath, she had called his name repeatedly, desperately hoping for a response from beneath the rubble, but none came. Realizing she needed help, she mounted her horse and rode at breakneck speed back to Holbrook, heading straight for the saloon where she knew Fleming and the others often stopped after work. The mine collapsed. She cried as she burst through the doors, drawing the immediate attention of everyone present. Luke is trapped inside. Fleming was on his feet instantly. When? How bad? Just now the main shaft completely caved in, Zara explained breathlessly. We need to get back there immediately. Bring shovels, rope, anything that might help. Within 20 minutes, a rescue party had assembled, including Fleming, Torres, Wheaton, and several other men from town with mining experience. They loaded tools onto wagons and set out for the mine, Zara riding ahead, her heart pounding with fear for Luke. Was he conscious when the shaft collapsed? Fleming asked as they rode. I think so, Zara replied. He pushed me up onto the surface. I heard him cry out as the timbers gave way, but then nothing. If he's alive, he'll be looking for another way out, Fleming said grimly. The ventilation shaft might be his best chance. It's too narrow, Zara protested. For a big man, yes, but it's still an airway. If it's intact, we might at least be able to get water and supplies to him while we dig through the main shaft. By the time they reached the mine, the sun was setting. Lanterns were lit as the men immediately began assessing the collapsed shaft. This is bad, Wheaton muttered, surveying the tightly packed debris that filled the shaft. It'll take days to clear this safely. Check the ventilation shaft, Fleming ordered Torres. See if it's still open. Torres returned minutes later, shaking his head. The entrance is partially collapsed, but there's still some airflow. I could hear it whistling through. That's something, Fleming said. Zara, do you have the mine maps? We need to locate exactly where that shaft connects to the galleries below. Zara retrieved the maps from the assay office, spreading them on a makeshift table as the men gathered around. She forced herself to focus on the task at hand, pushing aside her fear for Luke's safety. Here, she said, pointing to the map. The ventilation shaft connects to the eastern gallery, about 30 yards from where we were working today. If Daniels is conscious and mobile, he'll be heading for it, Fleming said. We should concentrate our efforts there first, try to open it enough to communicate. As the men moved toward the ventilation shaft, Zara remained by the collapsed main shaft, staring at the pile of rubble that separated her from Luke. Please be alive, she whispered. Please find a way out. Below ground, Luke had indeed located the ventilation shaft. It was a narrow vertical tunnel, roughly 2 feet in diameter, reinforced with metal rings. Looking up, he could see that it remained relatively intact, though some debris had fallen in from above. More importantly, he could feel a faint breeze. The shaft was still connected to the surface. The challenge would be climbing it. Under normal circumstances, it would be a difficult ascent for a man of his size. With his injured leg and bruised ribs, it seemed nearly impossible, but it was his only chance. Luke searched the nearby tool storage and found a coil of rope. He fashioned a crude harness around his chest and secured his lantern to it, leaving his hands free for climbing. Then, gritting his teeth against the pain, he began the arduous process of pulling himself up the shaft. The metal rings that reinforced the shaft provided handholds and footholds, but they were spaced for structural support, not human climbing. Every few feet, Luke had to stretch painfully to reach the next ring. His injured leg throbbed and his arms trembled with exertion. Several times he nearly lost his grip, saved only by the rope harness that caught on the rings. After what seemed like hours but was probably less than one, Luke had ascended perhaps 15 feet. He paused to rest, pressing his back against one side of the shaft and his feet against the other to hold his position. Sweat poured down his face despite the relatively cool air in the shaft, and his breathing came in ragged gasps. Just another 30 feet or so, he muttered to himself. You can do this. On the surface, the rescue team had located the upper opening of the ventilation shaft and were working to clear the debris that partially blocked it. It was slow, careful work. One wrong move could send more rubble down the shaft, potentially injuring Luke if he was attempting to climb up. Zara watched anxiously as Fleming directed the clearing operation. They had tried calling down the shaft several times, but if Luke had responded, his voice hadn't carried up the narrow tunnel. I think we're through, Fleming announced after nearly an hour of work. He lay flat on his stomach, putting his face near the opening. Daniels, can you hear me? Luke Daniels? There was a moment of silence, then a faint voice echoed up the shaft. Fleming, is that you? A cheer went up from the rescue party. Zara pushed forward, kneeling beside Fleming. Luke, are you hurt? She called down. Zara. The relief in Luke's voice was palpable even from a distance. Thank God you're all right. I'm about 15 feet up the shaft. Left leg's injured, but I can move. The shaft narrows above me. I don't think I can climb all the way. Fleming turned to the others. We need to lower a rope. He can tie it around himself and we'll pull him up. The shaft's too narrow and crooked for a straight pull, Torres pointed out. We'd need to rig a pulley system at each turn, which would take hours to set up properly, Wheaton added. What about digging down to meet him? Zara suggested. The ventilation shaft is only about 40 feet deep, according to the maps. If he's already climbed 15, Fleming considered this. That might work. We could dig alongside the shaft, then break through the side wall once we reach his position. I can hear you talking, Luke called up. Whatever you're planning, I should warn you that I'm not sure how stable this shaft is. I've felt some shifting as I climbed. Fleming's expression grew grim. That settles it. We can't risk any approach that might compromise the shaft further. We need to clear the main shaft. It's the only safe way. But that could take days, Zara protested. We don't have a choice, Fleming replied firmly. Daniels, can you make it back down to the gallery? You'll be safer there than hanging in that shaft if there's another tremor. There was a pause before Luke's voice came back up. I think so, but I'm not sure I can climb back up again later. Don't worry about that, Fleming called down. We're going to clear the main shaft. It'll take time, but it's the safest approach. Do you have water, food? No food, but there's a water barrel in the main gallery that survived the collapse. Good. Conserve your lantern oil. We'll work as quickly as we can. As Luke carefully made his way back down the ventilation shaft, the rescue team regrouped around the collapsed main shaft. Fleming organized them into shifts, knowing that clearing the debris would be a marathon, not a sprint. 3 men digging at a time, 2 resting, he instructed. We work in 30-minute rotations round the clock. Torres, you and I will take first shift with Wheaton. Zara stepped forward. I want to help with the digging, Fleming shook his head. No offense, Miss Finnegan, but this requires brute strength as much as technique. You'd exhaust yourself in minutes. Then I'll help in other ways, she insisted. Organize supplies, keep track of the shifts, make sure everyone has food and water, Fleming nodded. That would be a great help. And keep talking to Daniels through the ventilation shaft. Regular communication will help us know he's still all right down there. As the men began the painstaking process of clearing the shaft, Zara returned to the ventilation shaft opening. Luke, can you hear me? I'm here, came his reply, sounding more distant now that he had returned to the gallery below. Are they starting to dig? Yes. Fleming has organized shifts to work around the clock. How are you holding up? I've been better, Luke admitted. But I've also been worse. The gallery seems stable at least. How about you? Were you hurt in the collapse? Just some scrapes and bruises, Zara assured him. Nothing serious. There was a pause before Luke spoke again. Zara, I want you to know something in case things don't work out as we hope. Don't talk like that, Zara said sharply. They're going to get you out. I'm sure they will, Luke replied, though his tone suggested less certainty than his words. But still, I want to say this. Working with you these past weeks has been special. You're the most remarkable woman I've ever met. Zara felt tears welling in her eyes. Save your breath, Luke Daniels. You can tell me all about how remarkable I am once you're safely back on the surface. She heard his weak chuckle echo up the shaft. Yes, madam. Through that night and into the following day, the rescue operation continued without pause. The men dug tirelessly, passing buckets of debris hand to hand in a human chain. The work was slow and dangerous. Each layer of collapsed material had to be carefully assessed before removal to prevent further cave-ins. Zara maintained regular communication with Luke through the ventilation shaft, updating him on their progress and ensuring he remained conscious and alert. Between these check-ins, she organized supplies, prepared food, and tended to the minor injuries the diggers sustained. By noon of the second day, they had cleared perhaps 10 feet of the 80-foot shaft. The men were exhausted despite the rotation system, their hands blistered and raw from the constant digging. "At this rate, it'll take us a week," Wheaton said grimly during a rest period. "Then it takes a week," Fleming replied firmly. "We're not leaving him down there." Word of the rescue effort had spread to Holbrook, and additional volunteers arrived throughout the day, allowing Fleming to expand the rotation and give the original diggers more rest. The mayor himself came out, bringing additional supplies and offering the town's resources. "Whatever you need, just ask," he told Zara. "The whole town's behind you." As evening approached on the second day, Zara returned to the ventilation shaft for her regular check-in with Luke. "Luke, how are you doing?" There was no immediate response. Alarmed, Zara called again, louder, "Luke, can you hear me?" After what seemed an eternity, his voice came back, weaker than before. "I'm here, sorry, was resting. Are you all right? You sound different." "Just tired," he replied. "And thirsty. The water barrel doesn't have much left." Zara turned to Fleming, who had joined her at the shaft. "He's running out of water. We need to get some down to him." Fleming nodded grimly. "We've been discussing that. The ventilation shaft is too narrow for a standard canteen, but we might be able to lower a flexible water skin." They fashioned a thin water skin from an oiled cloth, filling it with water and attaching it to a long piece of twine. Carefully, Fleming lowered it down the ventilation shaft, calling instructions to Luke. "Reach up as high as you can, Daniels. The skin should be coming within reach soon." After several tense minutes, Luke's voice came back up. "Got it, I've got the water." "Drink sparingly," Fleming advised. "We'll send down more in a few hours." As night fell on the second day, the pace of the digging slowed despite everyone's best efforts. The deeper they got, the more challenging the work became. Larger pieces of timber had to be cut apart before removal, and the risk of secondary collapse increased. Zara refused to rest, maintaining her post near the ventilation shaft and helping wherever she could with the rescue effort. The physical exhaustion helped keep at bay the emotional turmoil churning inside her, the fear of losing Luke, and the growing realization of just how much he had come to mean to her in their short time together. Dawn of the third day brought renewed determination, but diminishing hope. They had cleared perhaps 25 feet of the shaft, less than a third of the distance. Luke's voice had grown weaker in their communications, his responses sometimes delayed or confused, suggesting he might be suffering from the effects of his injuries, dehydration, or the increasingly stale air in the mine. Around midday, a complication arose that threatened to halt the entire rescue operation. As the diggers removed a large support timber, a cascade of loose rock suddenly poured into the excavated portion of the shaft, nearly burying one of the men. "Pull him out." Fleming shouted as the others scrambled to grab their colleague's arms and drag him from the falling debris. When the dust settled, they found that much of their previous day's progress had been lost. Worse, the new collapse suggested that the entire shaft might be more unstable than they had initially assessed. Fleming called all the diggers to the surface for an emergency conference. "We can't continue this way," he said grimly. "Each layer we remove is destabilizing the layers below. If we keep going, we risk a secondary collapse that could kill both the diggers and Daniels." "Then what do we do?" Zara demanded. "We can't just give up." Fleming looked at her with sympathy but firm resolve. "No one's giving up, but we need a new approach." He turned to the assembled men. "We need to shore up as we go. That means placing new support timbers every few feet as we dig. It'll slow us down considerably, but it's the only safe way." "Do we have enough timber?" one of the volunteers asked. "Not on site," Fleming admitted. "We'll need to send to Holbrook for more, which means at least a few hours' delay." "He may not have a few hours," Zara said quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing in all of them. "Miss Finnegan," Fleming said gently, "I understand your concern. But rushing this operation could result in more deaths, not fewer. We have to do this properly." Zara knew he was right, but the thought of Luke waiting in the darkness, possibly injured worse than he'd admitted, was almost unbearable. While the others organized the timber requisition, she returned to the ventilation shaft. "Luke, can you hear me?" The silence that greeted her question sent a chill through her heart. She called again, more urgently, "Luke, please answer me." Finally, his voice came back, so faint she had to strain to hear it. "Still, here. There's been a complication," she explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "The shaft is more unstable than we thought. They're bringing additional timber to shore it up as they dig." Sounds sensible, Luke replied, each word seemingly an effort. "Always, safety first." "It's going to delay things by a few hours," Zara continued. "But once they start again, they'll be able to work more efficiently. Just hold on a little longer, not going anywhere." The attempt at humor, weak as it was, brought both tears and a smile to Zara's face. "I should hope not. We still have a silver mine to run, you and I." There was a pause before Luke spoke again. "Zara, if I don't—" "Stop it," she interrupted fiercely. "Don't you dare say goodbye to me, Luke Daniels. You're going to make it out of there." "Just listen," he persisted. "The silver vein, it's real. Your father was right. You need to know that, even if I'm not there to help you develop it." Zara wiped away tears. "You will be there. I'm not doing this without you. Do you hear me? I need you, Luke, not just for the mine." His response was so faint she almost missed it. "I need you too." The wait for the additional timber was excruciating. Zara paced near the shaft entrance, alternating between helping organize supplies and checking on Luke through the ventilation shaft. His responses grew less frequent and more disjointed, heightening her fear that he might be losing consciousness. When the wagons finally arrived from Holbrook with the timber, a renewed sense of urgency energized the rescue team. Fleming had devised a more structured approach, with one team cutting and preparing support beams while another carefully excavated debris, and a third immediately installing the new supports. "This will work," he assured Zara. "It's slower at first, but once we establish the pattern, we'll make steady progress." Through the afternoon and into the night of the third day, the work continued. True to Fleming's prediction, the initial pace was frustratingly slow as they established the new system. But by midnight, they had developed a rhythm that allowed them to advance while maintaining safety. Zara continued her regular check-ins with Luke, though his responses had become worryingly brief and sometimes incoherent. The water they had sent down seemed to help temporarily, but without food and with his injuries, his condition was clearly deteriorating. Dawn of the fourth day found them approximately halfway down the shaft. The rescue team was exhausted but determined. Additional volunteers had arrived from neighboring communities, drawn by the news of the trapped miner and the heroic rescue effort. Around midday, a shout from the shaft sent everyone running. "We've broken through to a pocket of open space," called one of the diggers. Fleming immediately took charge. "Hold position. No one move until we assess the stability." After a tense few minutes, Fleming emerged from the partially cleared shaft. "There's about a 10-foot section below where we are now that didn't completely collapse. It's mostly open space with some debris. If we can clear a path through that section, we'll be more than 2/3 of the way to the gallery." This news injected fresh energy into the rescue effort. The open section meant they could potentially advance much more quickly than expected, possibly reaching Luke by nightfall rather than the next day as they had feared. Zara hurried to the ventilation shaft to share the news. "Luke, can you hear me? They've found an open section in the shaft. They might reach you by tonight." There was no response. "Luke," she called again, her voice rising with panic. "Luke, please answer me." Nothing but silence came back up the shaft. Zara turned to Fleming, who had followed her. "He's not responding. We need to hurry." Fleming nodded grimly and returned to the excavation, pushing the teams to work even faster while still maintaining safety protocols. As the afternoon wore on, Zara remained by the ventilation shaft, calling down to Luke every few minutes, desperately hoping for a response. None came. The possibility that they might reach him only to find him already gone was too terrible to contemplate, but it haunted her nonetheless. By early evening, the diggers had cleared through the open section and resumed excavating the compacted debris below. They were now perhaps 20 feet from the main gallery, according to their calculations. Every man worked with grim determination, knowing they were in a race against time. Just as the sun was setting, another shout came from the shaft. "I can see light. There's a lantern burning below." Zara rushed to the shaft entrance as Fleming climbed up from below. "We can see a faint light in the gallery," he confirmed. "That means two things. One, the gallery is indeed intact as we hoped, and two, Daniels managed to keep a lantern burning, which suggests he was conscious at least recently." "How much further?" Zara asked urgently. 15 feet, maybe less, but this last section is the most dangerous. The debris is looser, which makes it faster to remove but more likely to trigger another collapse. "Do whatever you need to do," Zara said. "Just get him out." The final phase of the excavation was perhaps the most nerve-wracking. Each bucket of debris removed could potentially trigger a catastrophic secondary collapse. The diggers worked with agonizing care, frequently pausing to install additional supports. Near midnight, a different kind of shout echoed up from the shaft. "We're through. I can see the gallery floor." Zara's heart leapt as Fleming immediately descended to assess the situation. The minutes he was below ground seemed like hours. When he finally reappeared, his expression was unreadable. "We've broken through to the gallery," he reported. "The opening is still small, barely enough for a man to pass through. I called for Daniels but got no response. The lantern we saw is sitting on a rock about 10 yards from the shaft, but there's no sign of him nearby." "He must be deeper in the mine," Zara said, clinging to hope. "Maybe he went back to where we found the silver or to check another exit." "Possibly," Fleming agreed, though his tone suggested skepticism. "I've sent Torres through the opening to search. The gallery appears stable, so it should be safe enough." The wait for Torres to return was excruciating. Zara paced near the shaft entrance, alternating between prayer and silent bargaining with any higher power that might be listening. When Torres finally appeared at the bottom of the partially cleared shaft, his expression was grim. "I found him," he called up. "He's unconscious but alive, about 30 yards in, near the new excavation we were working on. He needs medical attention right away." "Is the opening large enough to bring him up?" Fleming called down. "Not yet," Torres replied. "We need to widen it at least another foot." While two men immediately set to work enlarging the opening, Zara ran to the assay office where the doctor from Holbrook had set up a temporary medical station. She returned with him to the shaft entrance, just as the diggers announced the opening was now wide enough. "I'm going down," Zara declared, already moving toward the ladder they had installed in the cleared portion of the shaft. "Miss Finnegan, that's not advisable," Fleming protested. "We still don't know how stable I'm going down," she repeated, her tone brooking no argument. "He's down there because of me and my father's theory. I'm not waiting up here while others take the risk of bringing him up." Fleming recognized the determination in her eyes and stepped aside. "Be careful. Follow the safety line we've rigged, and do exactly as Torres directs you once you're down there." The descent through the partially cleared shaft was harrowing. Though the diggers had installed temporary supports and cleared a path wide enough for a person to pass, the evidence of the collapse was all around jagged timber, precariously balanced rocks, the occasional shower of dirt from above. Zara focused on each handhold, each footstep, refusing to let fear overcome her. When she reached the bottom and squeezed through the opening into the gallery, the relief of being in a relatively open space was momentary. Torres waited for her, lantern in hand. "This way," he said grimly. "He's not good, Miss Finnegan. Prepare yourself." Zara followed Torres deeper into the mine, her heart pounding. When they reached Luke, she had to stifle a cry. He lay on his side, deathly pale, his breathing shallow and irregular. His injured leg was swollen, and dried blood caked the makeshift bandage he had applied. She knelt beside him, gently touching his face. "Luke, can you hear me? It's Zara." His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. She looked up at Torres. "We need to get him out immediately." Torres nodded. "We'll need to fashion a stretcher. There's some canvas and spare timber in the tool storage that might work." While Torres went to gather the materials, Zara remained with Luke, holding his hand and speaking softly to him. She used her handkerchief to wipe the dust and sweat from his face, noting with alarm how hot his skin felt to the touch. Infection had clearly set in. "You're going to be all right," she told him, as much to convince herself as anything. "We're taking you out of here, just hold on a little longer." When Torres returned with the makeshift stretcher, they carefully transferred Luke onto it. He moaned in pain but didn't fully regain consciousness. Maneuvering the stretcher through the mine gallery was challenging, and getting it up through the partially cleared shaft would be even more so, but there was no alternative. At the shaft opening, Fleming and several other men had rigged a pulley system to help lift the stretcher. With Zara and Torres guiding from below to prevent it from catching on the rough shaft walls, they began the slow process of raising Luke to the surface. The extraction took nearly an hour, with several heart-stopping moments when the stretcher became temporarily wedged against protruding debris. Throughout it all, Luke remained unconscious, which was perhaps a blessing given the jostling he endured. When the stretcher finally emerged from the shaft into the cool night air, a cheer went up from the assembled rescuers. The doctor immediately moved in, directing them to carry Luke to the assay office where he had prepared a treatment area. Zara followed, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten in her concern for Luke. The doctor examined him thoroughly while she hovered nearby, unwilling to leave even when Fleming gently suggested she get some rest. "His leg is infected," the doctor finally announced, "and he's severely dehydrated. The next 24 hours will be critical. If the infection hasn't spread too far and we can get fluids into him, he has a good chance." "And if it has spread?" Zara asked, dreading the answer. The doctor's expression was grave. "Then we may need to consider amputation to save his life." Zara felt the blood drain from her face. "No. There must be another option." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," the doctor said, softening his tone. "First, we clean the wound thoroughly and get some medicine into him. I've sent for ice from Holbrook to help bring down the fever. We'll know more by morning." Through that night, Zara remained at Luke's side, helping the doctor clean and dress the wound, spooning small amounts of water and broth between his lips whenever he showed signs of partial consciousness. By dawn, his fever seemed to have stabilized rather than worsened, a hopeful sign, according to the doctor. As morning light filtered through the assay office windows, Luke's eyes finally opened, focusing with obvious effort on Zara's face. "Am I dead?" he whispered. "Because you look like an angel." Tears of relief filled Zara's eyes. "If that's your idea of heavenly beauty, you must be delirious still," she said, trying to keep her voice light despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. A weak smile touched his lips. "You got me out." "We all did," she corrected. "The whole town, practically. You've become quite the local hero, Mr. Daniels." He winced as he tried to shift position. "My leg is infected," she said honestly. "But the doctor thinks we caught it in time. You need to rest and let the medicine work." Luke's eyes held hers. "You stayed with me in the mine. I could hear you sometimes calling down the shaft." "Of course I stayed," Zara replied simply. "I couldn't leave you down there alone." He reached for her hand, his grip weak but determined. "Thank you." "Rest now," she urged, squeezing his hand gently. "We can talk more when you're stronger." Luke's recovery was slow but steady. The infection in his leg responded to the doctor's treatments, and amputation was ultimately ruled out. After a week of care in the assay office, he was well enough to be moved to Holbrook, where he took a room at the Juniper to continue his convalescence. Zara visited daily, bringing food, books, and updates on the mine. The collapse had set back their operations, but the silver vein they had discovered remained accessible once the mine was properly reinforced. "Fleming says we can resume limited operations within a month," she told Luke one afternoon as she sat beside his bed. "He's supervising the installation of a completely new support system for the main shaft." "That's good," Luke replied. He was sitting up now, color returning to his face, though he still tired easily. "The vein we found will more than pay for the repairs and improvements." Zara hesitated, then continued. "I've been thinking about the future of the mine. My original plan was to prove its viability, then seek additional investors to expand operations." A sound strategy, Luke agreed. Yes, but circumstances have changed. She met his eyes. I almost lost you in that mine, Luke. It's made me reconsider what's truly important. Luke studied her face. What are you saying, Zara? I'm saying that while I still believe in the mine's potential, I'm no longer certain I want to devote my entire future to it. She took a deep breath. My father spent his life chasing mineral deposits across the country. He made important discoveries, wrote influential papers, but he died alone in a boarding house in Denver with no one but a landlady to mourn him. You're not your father, Luke said gently. No, but I was following his path. She reached for his hand. When you were trapped in that mine, I realized something. The silver doesn't matter to me nearly as much as you do. Luke's expression softened. Zara, please let me finish, she interrupted. I'm not abandoning the mine. But I'm proposing a partnership that extends beyond business. I want you to stay in Holbrook, Luke, not just as the mine engineer, but as my partner in every sense. A slow smile spread across Luke's face. Zara Finnegan, are you proposing marriage to me? Color rose in her cheeks. I suppose I am, in a manner of speaking, though it's terribly improper of me. Luke laughed, wincing slightly as the movement jarred his still healing ribs. Propriety be damned. You dug me out of a collapsed mine shaft. I think that earns you the right to break a few social conventions. He shifted position, taking both her hands in his. But I can't let you make the proposal. My mother would turn in her grave. His expression grew serious. Zara, when I was trapped in that darkness, not knowing if I would ever see daylight again, do you know what kept me going? The thought of you. Not the silver, not the mine, you. Luke, I've been half in love with you since the day you showed me your father's geological surveys, he continued. After these past weeks, there's no half about it anymore. I love you, Zara Finnegan, with every beat of my heart. Tears welled in Zara's eyes. I love you too. Then marry me, Luke said, his voice gentle but firm. Be my wife. We'll develop the mine together, build a life here in Holbrook or wherever else our dreams take us. Yes, Zara replied without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you. Their wedding took place 2 months later in Holbrook's small church. Luke had recovered enough to stand without assistance, though he still walked with a slight limp that the doctor suggested might be permanent. Zara didn't care. To her, it was simply a reminder of how close she had come to losing him and how precious their time together was. The entire town turned out for the ceremony. Fleming served as Luke's best man, while the mayor's wife stood up with Zara. After the simple service, a celebration was held at the newly renovated Morgan mine property, where construction had begun on a modest house that would serve as both the mine office and the couple's home. As they stood together greeting their well-wishers, Luke leaned close to Zara's ear. Happy, Mrs. Daniels? Zara smiled up at him. Happier than I ever imagined possible, Mr. Daniels. The Morgan mine, renamed the Finnegan Daniels mine in honor of both Zara's father and the partnership that now owned it, proved even more productive than William Finnegan's notes had predicted. Within a year, it was employing 20 men and producing enough silver to make Luke and Zara comfortable, if not wealthy. More important to them than the financial success, however, was the life they built together. Their house grew alongside the mine operations, expanding to accommodate first a proper library filled with geological texts and engineering manuals, then a nursery for their son William, born almost exactly 2 years after the mine collapse. Luke's engineering background and Zara's geological knowledge proved a powerful combination. They developed innovative mining techniques that improved both safety and efficiency, eventually publishing papers that were studied at mining schools across the country. When their daughter Alina arrived 3 years after William, they decided to scale back their direct involvement in the day-to-day mine operations, promoting Fleming to foreman and establishing a formal management structure that allowed them more time with their growing family. On the 5th anniversary of the mine collapse, Luke and Zara stood together at the entrance to the main shaft, long since rebuilt and now a model of modern mining engineering. Do you ever think about that day? Zara asked, her hand finding his as they looked into the dark opening. Sometimes, Luke admitted. Not the fear or the pain, but the moment I heard your voice calling down to me. That's the part I remember most clearly. Zara leaned her head against his shoulder. "I was so frightened we wouldn't reach you in time." "But you did," Luke reminded her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You moved heaven and earth, or at least several tons of it, to get me out. And I'd do it again," she said firmly. "Though I'd prefer if you stayed above ground from now on." Luke laughed. "A reasonable request, Mrs. Daniels." As they turned away from the mine entrance toward their home, where their children were waiting with Fleming and his wife for a celebration dinner, Zara reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. Her father's geological theories had led her to Holbrook. The mine collapse had nearly taken Luke from her before their life together had truly begun. Yet here they were, 5 years later, with a thriving business, 2 beautiful children, and a love that had only deepened with time. "Penny for your thoughts," Luke said as they walked the short path to their house. Zara smiled up at him. "I was just thinking that sometimes the most valuable things are buried the deepest." "Like silver veins?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Like silver veins," she agreed. "And like stubborn engineers trapped in mine collapses." Luke laughed, the sound carrying across the property that had transformed from an abandoned failure into the foundation of their shared life. "I'll always be grateful you thought I was worth digging for." "The best investment I ever made," Zara replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him as the setting sun cast long shadows across the Arizona landscape they both had come to call home.